Hey babies, it's your favorite host, Mr. BMG, back at it again with another episode. Let's get into it. I was just going through the streets of the internet as per usual, and I came across, the billboard ranking of the past week, and I saw that Morgan Wallen had 6 of the 10 top 10 songs, and I was just so shocked because, I like to think that I'm fairly current with music and the happenings of, who's releasing and all of that stuff. Obviously I don't listen to everything, but top 10, I think that would imply that everyone knows that song, or it's in a lot of people's high rotation. So I was just shocked to see that he's got like a number 1 song and I've never heard of it ever. Going back to how we started speaking about Morgan Wallen, he was on SNL and he made that weird abrupt exit or awkward interaction that he did where he just walked off. And remember when we were talking about the fact that he is obviously doing that for attention and to get viewership because, soon after that, he dropped an album and clearly the album now is number 1 and most of the songs, or a couple of the songs on it, are within the top 10, which is insane. First of all, who's listening to him? I'm so confused because the only song that I know is Thought You Should Know. That's kind of the only one, which I feel like was a crossover hit. You would know that song. Well, I feel like a lot of people would know that song. But a lot of his new body of work, I guess maybe he's just got a really intense support base who is forever paying attention to the work that he's releasing and, is concentrated on his career and listening to his music day in, day out. It's so insane. I wouldn't even put him in a mainstream celebrity status. I just would think he's just another maybe country musician. I think that's his genre, but I wouldn't put him, in main celebrity iconic, A-list. But if he's getting the numbers that he's getting, then clearly there's something to it. I also do feel like the Billboard, and just the popularity of having a number 1 song, I feel like it's also very political. It's in some ways, I think, coming from my own random opinion, that it's calculated. It's very questionable. I feel like Billboard has been trying to, with the list that I told you about that we were speaking of how they're releasing lists ranking musicians based off of their data, I think those lists created so much noise for them that I think in some ways the reliability of their Billboard charts and the music and their chart data is maybe contentious in people's minds because obviously it's an authority, but I think sometimes never really seen many artists who dominate the top 10 in that way. Could be white privilege, could be some other metric that's used to make it appear that he's successful in some ways, a promotion of sort, to make people think that his music is bigger than what it is. I have no idea, but I find it hard to believe that everyone is listening to him and I've never even heard a thing, other than the SNL thing. So yeah, I found that suspicious, but good for you for dominating the charts, Morgan. And if you release something good, who's to say I won't listen to it? An interesting story that I came across was how Zaya Wade, who is Dwayne Wade's daughter, was speaking to Dwayne, about difficult conversations that queer kids would like to have, or concepts that queer kids would like to make their parents understand that may be very difficult to have them, particularly as it relates to, the culture of Black people and how queerness is really not normalized. It was just a very interesting interaction to see how intelligent, Zaya is, and so self-actualized and so self-aware, but also very honest. I think it was honest of Zaya to speak about how it's very difficult to have queer conversations with Black people, because I think that is a universal truth that is very obvious no matter where you're from, but also in some ways implying that it may be more comfortable to sort of have conversations with people of a different race. I guess speaking through my personal experience, I guess when I was growing up, I could have conversations with, or easier conversations with white males, because they never presented themselves as threatening to me. But a lot of my bullies and the people who kind of, sometimes gave me a difficult time were Black males. And so because of that, it became a very complicated relationship that there's somewhat discomfort and, a sort of heightened sense of being guarded around them. Just in relation to Zaya, she's basically saying that it's very difficult to get Black people to understand queerness and to accept queer people and to allow them to coexist. And I could tell that there's a lot of truth in what Zaya was saying in this, because a lot of the people in the comments were being rude and saying, well, this is a man and a man having a conversation, and just very disrespectful and taking away, Zaya's humanity and, disregarding their existence essentially, which I found completely problematic and, disturbing, that these are the people that we live amongst who feel so strongly, about disregarding somebody else's identity when we've been fighting for identity politics and, being regarded and being respected as people, as black people for centuries. That has been our struggle, our burden that we carry. Yet we're so quick to do that to other people of the same color, who are within the queer community, and which really just like puts a discord and, dismembers the intersectionality of these struggles and the people within them. So I just feel like it was important for her to have that conversation. I also felt that it was also kind of clear how probably Gabrielle Union is quite close to Zaya. Gabrielle Union is married to Dwayne Wade, right? So naturally, I think she would take on, a motherly role in her life. And I feel like I've just always seen Gabrielle Union as somebody who's very smart, metacognitive, and very self-aware, man, like a very witty and, intelligent human being. And so I could see how there's a connection between Zaya and Gabrielle Union, even though I've never really seen their relationship play out, but just based on intellect and based on just that sense of just being a smart, articulate, and, well-rounded and well-versed black girl. Gabrielle Union has always been that. And Zaya, you could see that there's some correlation to that. So she just looks like she's got a really good head on her shoulders. She's got really good people around her to allow her to explore that journey, and to self-actualize in the purest and in the most accurate way that, Zaya has envisioned for herself, her life. And really, it's beautiful to see. I think for me, it always takes me back because I was also, when I was younger, extremely vocal and, protective of my identity and so sure of my identity and its complexities, and loved to articulate and have those conversations, important conversations. And sometimes you don't feel heard in the way that you want to be heard. And I feel like it's just beautiful to see another queer younger person who is well aware of themselves enough to already be having these conversations, because these were the conversations that I was having at that age too, and we want to see these more of these conversations happening, in your early stages of life, so that you have your whole life to learn about yourself, but you self-actualize and not the last 5 minutes. So I only wish the best for Zaya. I only really hope that Dwayne Wade, the father, is very supportive of the journey, but genuinely so, and not necessarily just for the clout or it looks cool for a black father, to be supportive of the queer kid to the public. So I hope that the whole experience, their relationship, is very rooted and it's very authentic and it's, very special both off camera and on camera. So Hailey Bieber is now a billionaire, apparently, allegedly. Maybe not. Well, she has this cosmetics company or beauty brand, which I guess is like a buzzword for these girls, called Rhode, and she sold it for $1 billion. But obviously she's not the only shareholder, so it may work out to not necessarily making her a billionaire, but let's just say her net worth is pretty much in a good place at this point. And it's a very interesting story because the last time I was reflecting on Hailey Bieber, she was, on the cover of Vogue, and, I saw the comment of how essentially Justin Bieber was like kind of embarrassing her in a way by, how he was reflecting on the fact that he had mentioned to her in an argument that they would apparently, or she would apparently never be on the cover of Vogue, and yet there she was on the cover of Vogue, so I found that just like super embarrassing and kind of making the moment about him and just quite disgusting and, just typical trash, Bieber behavior, to be honest. Like was just unnecessary. And you could have let her have that moment, and really, if anything, feed the light, into her, because she's obviously your wife. So it just looks like he's in a really weird, dark place. And I almost feel like she needs to move on from him and marry somebody else who's in a better place, because I just feel like the place he's in, just even from afar, like I don't know his personal life, but just from afar looking in, look like he's in a very toxic place, almost in a very stagnant place, in a place of being a has-been, but not knowing how to revive that, even though he has so much equity that he could have tapped into. But I think at this point people don't care. I don't really care about new music from Justin Bieber. I just don't, I really don't, because I've written him off, because I feel like he's just too far gone, in some ways he's kind of like Kanye West, where it's just like he's just too far gone, nobody cares anymore, and you can just sit there and be chaotic in your own little corner and everyone will just pretend like nothing is happening, because if you don't give you attention, I think that's the best attention that you can get. So yeah, he's quite tiring, and it was just in the wrong moment to have said all of that, because you can almost see that the public now feels that this girl's with the wrong person, and for the purposes that they were together, they served them, those purposes were served, and she just needs to move on, and this step of selling her company and really getting into a very different level, financially, just means that she needs to move away from this dude. I hope they had a prenup so that this, equity, she's, does not have to be split, because I don't think Justin Bieber is in the best I don't think Justin Bieber's in the best place. He's not peak where he was unless he's invested wisely. I don't think, the most is happening with his situation. So it just looks like the girl needs to separate herself and move on. And yeah, good on you for starting that business. I feel like that's like the get rich quick scheme for every white girl in Hollywood nowadays. Like create a beauty brand, have that beauty brand valued for some ridiculous amount, obscure amount, have a ginormous company buy that, who that billion doesn't even mean a thing, and all of a sudden, voila, you're a billionaire, oh my gosh. But really, I think what it is just packaging, branding, and not necessarily the product that's superior, but it's selling a brand, putting a brand, somebody's brand into a monetary value and selling that, essentially selling yourself away, I think is what it is. And obviously it doesn't even look like you have to be like at the top of the food chain, essentially. So yeah, very interesting. I just found that interesting that happened, and I'm hoping that Hailey Bieber is only has more greener pastures going forward, and that girl, if that man is not doing you right and you don't feel good around him, that you move on, sweetie, because the game has changed. Rihanna's father, Ronald Fenty, actually passed away at the age of 70, and obviously the streets of the internet are up in arms about this event, because Rihanna has sort of been within the limelight again, with how she's pregnant, so obviously like traveling and giving us pregnancy fashions, and obviously her Fenty beauty brand, that's doing so well. So, and the Met Gala that had happened, so she's sort of just been on the up and up, and in a good space. I guess this coming out and happening definitely would have put a damper in her headspace. So I'm obviously like hoping that she recovers from all of this. I guess more importantly, what I want to talk about is the complicated relationship that Rihanna had with her father, because obviously there were allegations and some conversations that were allegedly had, where obviously like there was implications made about how he was a violent person in the past, violent to her mother, and yeah, all of that. So it became a very difficult situation. I think she also experienced quite a bit of abuse as well. So that sort of made up for a very difficult relationship with her father. And essentially, yeah, like I'm not even sure if they ended up making up or being in a better place. I know that they were obviously civil, and for the most part, I think towards the latter part of his life, they were okay. So if they had made that peace, then obviously this will definitely affect her. And it's a very complicated time, and it will obviously bring back a lot of different like feelings and emotions and stuff. So yeah, I can only imagine. But Riri, the world obviously supports you in this time, and we know that you'll come out of it strong. I was reading up a story of how there was a trans woman, and the trans woman is called Pure Evil apparently. And this trans woman was sentenced to 15 years in prison for, I think there was like a violent crime, or I think it was a stabbing apparently, of a person who was slurring and being abusive towards, her apparently. And it became a whole like situation. So it ended up fatally. The reason why I'm talking about it is that we often hear of these hate crimes, but often the outcome is the other way around, where the queer person was the one who was affected and didn't make it out, and often the response is very different. It's just another statistical response, and people don't really care to dig too much into it, because it's a queer person that's they're on the fringes of society, so nobody cares clearly. So now I think when I just looked through the streets of the internet about relating to the story, I just saw how a lot of people were up in arms, but also were very disrespectful towards this person's identity, calling them a man, and I guess the whole ordeal to not have happened, or essentially negate, not acknowledging the abuse and the fact that the actions were apparently self-defense. So not acknowledging that, but more so putting all of the blame on this person. While I don't condone violence of any kind at all, and doesn't warrant them. What happened may not, for some people, warrant the response. I think queer lives do matter in the sense that we need to live all in harmony. We need to not be disrespectful towards each other, and queer lives need to be respected as much as the lives of those who are not queer. And that's really where I stand on that. And I also feel like violence is not the answer, and that it's very unfortunate that all of this had to come to this. And I just feel like people just need to live in, harmony and not disrespect each other and respect each other's space, because really there's more than enough space in this world for us to all exist, and to all exist peacefully. An interesting story I wanted to get into was how Cardi B and Offset are kind of going at it again. I feel like their relationship has been on a loop of dysfunction from the very beginning, and it's really quite unfortunate that Cardi B sentenced herself to being in such a relationship that took away from her career more than it benefited her career. I'm talking about them because Offset is apparently asking for spousal support, and I do feel like that's such a stretch for him. I do feel like it's maybe another way to punish her or to continue this toxic cycle that they find themselves in, where he won't do right by her, he'll cheat on her, right, apparently, but he's not going to cheat on her, and if he's not with her, he's going to make her life difficult, and wants to possess her even though he doesn't want to treat her right, which is the most toxic thing you can ever come across. And I do feel like Offset is incredibly toxic, you know, and the worst thing that could have happened to Cardi B, unfortunately, and she is now living through those consequences and is stuck with that for life because there's children involved. So yeah, it's such a reach on his part, you know. And when I heard about, apparently he is still staying in Cardi B's house and bringing girls there, and I was just like, him and that Russell guy, you know, Drew Sidora's man, they have a lot in common. They're both trash. Like, they're legit both trashy men, you know, probably deeply narcissistic, and just the worst things that could have happened to like these girlies. So it just reminded me of him, because I feel like that guy, I saw it play out on The Housewives. Now with Cardi B, she's not on a show at the moment, so we can't really see it all playing out. But if it was on a show, it would be so toxic and such a mess that everybody will be watching, unfortunately. But yeah, I don't think he needs the spousal support, even though Cardi B has more money than he does. I don't think he needs it. I think he just needs to move on and stop this toxic cycle of trying to pull her in, but also pushing her away in the same motion. I just feel like it's just so dysfunctional, and it really just needs to stop, and they just need to focus on being good co-parents and not dragging themselves through the mud, because I think it can only also affect the children, because there'll be resentment that develops, and you know, the parents will start, you know, feeding that resentment to the children and talking badly about the other parent, which really will only affect your children. So I do feel like, Cardi, you know, distance yourself from this person, make this whole situation go away, you know. And you, Offset, I feel like you just need to stop being so toxic and leave this person to be, you know, by themselves, and to explore and to date other people and just be healthy co-parents, you know, and to not be so childish and so toxic and so unnecessary. You're releasing a new album. I don't know if it's going to be this year, but I hope it's not going to be, you know, be pushed back again. One thing I also advise is, God, do not work with, I know, you know, that song that she released, Like What, was directed by Offset. I think that needs to stop. Like, Cardi B needs to professionally stop working with Offset. As well as the personal, they just need to cut ties in every aspect of it, because that will also complicate the relationship. So I hope that this album, there's no interaction with Offset professionally in any capacity, and she's doing her own thing and she focuses on her profession before people stop caring and actually move on from, you know, thinking about Cardi B and wanting more Cardi B music. Anyway, babies, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Messiest Bitch on the Internet. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and also follow us on Instagram at @BigMoneyEntertainment_, and I'll see you again on the next one. Mwah, mwah.